The photograph appeared on a Friday. Nora Callahan was sitting in the break room of the pediatric clinic, where she worked as a medical records coordinator, eating a turkey sandwich over a stack of insurance forms, when her phone buzzed with a news alert she had not subscribed to and could not explain. The Chicago Tribune's Society desk. A wedding announcement, the kind that ran with a professional photograph. The couple posed on the steps of some renovated building in the West Loop, the kind of building that used to make things and now charged $4,000 a month for the privilege of living inside it. The man was named Daniel Ashworth. She had called him Dan for 6 years. He was standing with his arm around a woman named Priya Sehgal, whose family, according to the article, had founded one of the largest private equity firms in the Midwest. He was wearing a navy suit she did not recognize. He looked like a man who had successfully deleted his own search history and was pleased with the results. Nora was 8 months pregnant. She put the phone face down on the table, finished half her sandwich, threw the other half away, and went back to work. She filed 11 patient records that afternoon. She answered 4 calls from insurance adjusters. She stayed 20 minutes late to finish a backlog from the morning, because that was the kind of person she was, the kind who completed things regardless of what else was happening. On the train home she stood, rather than sat, one hand on the overhead bar, watching the city move past the scratched windows. She did not think about Daniel Ashworth. She thought about the second trimester fatigue that had lifted in the past 3 weeks and the strange physical confidence that had replaced it, as if her body had made some private decision that everything was going to be fine and had begun acting accordingly. She thought about the crib she still needed to assemble. She thought about the name she had chosen in February and had not told anyone yet, holding it close the way you hold things that are too good and too new to expose to too much air. She thought about Daniel Ashworth when she got home, standing in the kitchen making pasta, the way she had learned to think about difficult things, taking the thought out, examining it with a kind of clinical remove, and setting it back down. She was a medical records coordinator. She understood that the record of a thing and the thing itself were not the same, and that some things were better managed by keeping them at the level of record. She ate her pasta and went to bed and woke at 3 in the morning and lay in the dark for an hour and then got up and made tea and sat at the kitchen table and let herself, for exactly that hour, be as angry as she actually was. Then she washed her cup, went back to bed, and slept until 6. Her apartment was in Pilsen, on the 2nd floor of a 2-flat owned by a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Okafor, who brought her soup sometimes and never asked questions she was not prepared to answer. The apartment had exposed brick on one wall, a clawfoot tub, and a window in the kitchen that caught the afternoon sun for exactly 40 minutes each day. Nora had been there 14 months. She had arrived with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of books and the specific, stripped-down clarity of a person who has just signed a divorce agreement and driven directly from the attorney's office to a new address. She was 33 years old, and she was not broken. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself, in the mornings before the day got complicated. She was tired and careful, and sometimes very afraid, but she was not broken. What she could not easily hold was the precise nature of what Daniel had done to the finances during the 8 months between when he first retained a divorce attorney and when she found out he had done so. Her own attorney had used the phrase, potentially worth pursuing, had also used costly and time-consuming. Nora had looked at her bank balance, looked at the timeline of her pregnancy, and signed the papers. She had made her peace with that decision. Or she had told herself she had, which is a different thing, and she was honest enough to know the difference. The envelope was there when she got home on a Wednesday, 6 days before the wedding. It was propped against her door rather than slid under it, which meant someone had come up the stairs. No postage. Her name in neat, compressed handwriting she did not recognize. Nora Callahan. She stood in the hallway for a moment in her coat, work bag over one shoulder, looking at it the way you look at something you do not entirely trust but cannot responsibly ignore. She picked it up and went inside. She made tea first, put her bag down, hung up her coat, filled the kettle, stood at the counter while it came to temperature. She was not stalling. She was preparing. There is a difference, and she was clear on which one it was. The envelope contained 11 pages, bank statements, account transfer summaries, a corporate filing from the state of Illinois for an entity called Bridgewater Consulting Group LLC, and 2 printed email exchanges between Daniel and someone identified in the address line as P. Segal. The corporate filing was dated 7 months before Daniel had first raised the subject of divorce, which was to say, 7 months before she had any idea that divorce was a subject he had been thinking about at all. The transfer summaries were detailed and organized in the way of someone who understood exactly what they were describing. Over 5 months, money had moved from their joint investment account and a shared brokerage position into Bridgewater Consulting, which had no website, no registered office address beyond a law firm in the Loop, and no discernible business activity in any public record. The total was $280,000. When Daniel had filed his financial disclosure with the court, Bridgewater Consulting Group did not appear. The emails were shorter and harder to read than the financial documents. In the first, Daniel told Priya Segal that the financial restructuring was nearly complete and that the prior situation would be fully resolved well before the announcement. In the second, 3 weeks later, he wrote, "The baby question is a legal matter at this point, not a personal one. I've spoken to someone about preemptive steps." Nora read that sentence 4 times. Then she set the papers down and looked out the window at the narrow backyard where Mrs. Okafor grew tomatoes in the summer bare and turned over now in the early spring, dark soil, and the memory of last year's steaks, waiting for warmth. The baby question is a legal matter. She thought about her son. She thought about what it would mean to him, years from now, to discover that his father had described him in writing as a legal matter to be resolved before an announcement. She thought about what it would mean to him if she left that undiscovered. There was no note card in the envelope, no message, only the documents themselves, arranged in sequence, each one dated, each one legible. The work of someone careful and deliberate who had decided she was the right person to receive them. She sat at the kitchen table until it was fully dark outside. Then she went to her closet and found the dark green dress she had not worn in 2 years. She held it against herself in the bathroom mirror. It was a good dress. It would do. She would go to the wedding. Not to make a scene, not to confront Daniel at the altar or demand something she was not going to receive. She would go because there were people in that room making significant decisions, financial, legal, personal decisions, based on an incomplete account of who Daniel Ashworth actually was. And because her son was going to grow up and ask questions, and she needed to be able to answer them honestly. She hung the dress on the back of the bathroom door and went to bed and slept better than she had in weeks. The Rosecliff Pavilion was everything that money looks like when it has stopped trying to prove itself and started simply expecting to be believed. The grounds were formal clipped boxwood, raked gravel paths, a long reflecting pool that held the late afternoon sky in flat and silver stillness. The main building was Georgian Revival, pale stone with tall windows, and the light inside fell in long rectangles across parquet floors polished to the warmth of something very old and very well maintained. The flowers were all white. The linens were ivory. The guests wore the studied ease of people who have attended enough events of this kind to know that appearing effortless is its own form of labor, and who had executed it well. Nora arrived by car and parked at the far end of the lot in the shade of an elm tree that had been old when the building was new. She sat for a moment with the engine off, looking at the pale stone facade and the white flowers banked against the entrance. She thought, with the specific clarity of a person who has stopped lying to herself, "This is a beautiful place for a false thing." She got out and walked to the door. At the registration table, a young man with a tablet looked at her name and found it without difficulty. "Guest of Mr. Whitfield," he said. "Table 16. He handed her a card embossed in silver. She went in. The ceremony began at 5 o'clock in the main hall, with tall windows letting in the last of the May afternoon light, and a string quartet playing something that Nora recognized but could not name. She sat at table 16, behind the column, and watched. Priya Segal came down the aisle on her father's arm, and Nora watched her the way you watch someone you are trying to understand rather than judge. She was composed and beautiful in the way of people who have been prepared for occasions like this since childhood, not performing happiness exactly, but executing it, which is what composure usually is when you look closely enough. Her dress had been made for her specifically. You could tell by the way it moved with her rather than around her. But it was her eyes that caught Nora's attention. They were bright and managed, performing the correct sequence of emotions: wonder at the flowers, warmth toward the guests, certainty about the man waiting at the end of the aisle, and underneath all of that, barely visible, the watchful quality of someone who monitors the room even when the room is supposed to be watching her. She was not entirely at ease. She was working very hard at ease, which is not the same thing. Vikram Sehgal, walking his daughter down the aisle, had the bearing of a man for whom every occasion is also an assessment. He watched Daniel at the altar with the particular expression of approval that is not personal but financial, the look of someone who has made a commitment and is confirming, one final time, that the variables are what he was told they were. The vows were written rather than traditional, which told Nora something about how the event had been managed. Daniel's were delivered in the practiced, slightly elevated cadence of someone who had rehearsed them enough times that they no longer sounded like rehearsal. Priya's were quieter and more careful, and there was a half-second hesitation before I do that no one in the room appeared to notice. Nora noticed. She sat with her hands in her lap and her bag on the chair beside her, and she thought, "I did not come here to feel sorry for you, and I did not come here to feel superior to you, and I am not sure what I feel." She thought, "You made your choices, the same as everyone makes their choices, with incomplete information, under pressure, inside a story someone else had already started writing." She thought, "What happens next is not really about you either." The officiant pronounced them married. The room applauded. The string quartet began again. Nora did not applaud, but she did not need to. The cocktail hour opened onto the garden terrace, where the reflecting pool caught the early evening sky, and the waitstaff moved through the guests with practiced precision, distributing champagne and small plates of food that were beautiful in the way of things that are not meant to fill you up. Nora declined the champagne, accepted a glass of sparkling water, and positioned herself near the garden doors where she could see the room and the terrace both. She watched Daniel work the crowd. He was very good at it, she had always known that. He moved through groups, with the ease of a man who genuinely enjoyed the performance of being liked, stopping to shake hands, touching elbows, laughing at the right moments, asking questions he already knew the answers to so that the person answering them would feel heard. She had watched him do this at 100 events over 6 years. She had once found it attractive. Now she watched it with the detachment of someone studying a technique whose mechanics have become fully visible. She thought about the documents in her envelope. She thought about the number $280,000 and about what that number represented, which was not just money. It was the specific shape of a decision made in the dark, before she knew anything was being decided, by a man who had already written the end of their marriage while she was still living inside the middle of it. The baby question is a legal matter. She put her hand briefly against her bag, where the envelope rested, and then took it away. The man who had sent the envelope found her during the cocktail hour, in the quiet corner near the garden doors, where people stood when they wanted to see the room without being entirely part of it. His name was Roy Whitfield. He was 61, with a gray beard trimmed close, and the particular unhurried quality of someone who has spent decades in rooms where patience is considered a competitive advantage. He had been Daniel's chief financial officer for 9 years, a tenure that ended 4 months ago when Daniel restructured his position out of existence 3 weeks. Roy told her with the precision of a man who had thought about the timing at length. After Vikram Sehgal made his first capital commitment to the company, he held a glass of club soda and did not drink from it. "I was not certain you would come," he said. "I was not certain either," Nora said. "Until this morning, when I decided that certainty was overrated. I want to be direct about what I am able to offer," he said. "The documents I sent you are accurate. I have the originals and additional materials correspondence between Daniel and the attorneys who established Bridgewater, internally dated, with amounts matching the transfer records. If you pursue this legally, I will provide everything, and I will testify to what I personally witnessed." He paused. "I was present for several of the transfer decisions. I raised concerns at the time. I was told it was outside my purview." "Why are you doing this now?" she said. "You have had these documents for months." He was quiet for a moment. He looked out through the garden doors at the reflecting pool, where the evening light was breaking and reassembling on the surface of the water in small, continuous corrections. "I kept waiting," he said, "for someone with more standing to act." Someone who would not have to walk into a room like this and carry the weight of being doubted before she had said a single word. He looked back at her. That was a failure of nerve. I am not going to describe it as anything else. I am sorry for the time it cost you. Nora looked at him steadily. He did not look away. There is also the matter of the email, she said, about preemptive legal steps. He has already consulted a family law attorney, Roy said. His intention was to establish a legal record favorable to himself before you could establish yours. After tonight, that becomes considerably more complicated. The sequence of events becomes visible. Judges notice sequences. Nora was quiet. She looked across the room and found Daniel at the bar with a group of men, laughing, glass raised, performing the role of a man who had arranged everything exactly as intended. She thought about her son, about the name she had been keeping since February, about the apartment in Pilsen and the 40 minutes of afternoon sun and the dresser in the nursery she still needed to paint. Table 16, she said. Behind the column. Far enough to observe, Roy said. Close enough that you can be seen, if it comes to that. Thank you, Roy. He moved away. She ordered a sparkling water from a passing server and went to find her seat. He saw her during the salad course. She felt it before she confirmed it, the particular weight of attention from across a room that is different from ordinary noticing. She looked up from her water glass and found Daniel already looking, fork untouched, against the rim of his plate. His expression processed the unexpected information and became neutral in approximately 2 seconds, which most people would have read as composure. He crossed the room at the unhurried pace of a man who has decided that appearing unhurried is more important than whatever urgency he was actually managing. He crouched beside her chair, a deliberate choice, because crouching reads as consideration and standing over someone reads as aggression. And he was, above all else, a man who understood the optics of every available posture. Nora, low, controlled. I need you to leave. Hello, Daniel. I don't know what you think you're doing here. He glanced at her stomach, back to her face. I am asking you, as civilly as I can manage, to please go home. I'm eating dinner, she said. He recalibrated. The jaw moved in the way she recognized the involuntary signal of a man recalculating while trying not to appear to recalculate. He held her gaze for 3 more seconds and then stood and returned to his table. She ate her salad. The dressing was excellent. She noted it with the small, precise attention she gave to things that deserved it. He came back after the main course, during the band's first set, when the room noise had risen enough to provide cover. He was done with crouching. You need to leave, he said, not asking, stating. I am not going to do that, Nora said. You have nothing to gain here. Nothing you do tonight changes anything. I know that. The bewilderment on his face was genuine, she could tell, because genuine was rare from him and had a different texture than performed. Then, what is the point? What do you want? She looked at him. She wanted to give him the truest version of the answer. I want my son to be able to ask me someday what happened, she said, and for me to be able to tell him I told the truth. Something crossed his expression that was more honest than anything she had seen there in a long time, not remorse. The look of a man encountering a value system entirely unlike his own and failing to locate its weakness. Go back to your wedding, Daniel, she said. He looked at her bag, then at her face. He understood now that she was carrying something that the stillness he had been reading as retreat was not retreat at all, but a different thing that had chosen its moment and had not arrived at it yet. What he did next was not calculated. She would think about that later, about how, at the very end, he finally acted without calculation, which was the only honest thing he did all evening. He reached for her. He gripped the fabric at her shoulder seam and pulled with sudden, mechanical force, the motion of someone who has exhausted every available option and arrived at the one he cannot walk back. The fabric tore from shoulder to mid-chest. A brief, clean sound in the gap between one song and the next. Nora caught the table edge and stood. Priya Sehgal, at the head table, went still in the specific way of someone receiving information they had half expected and had been hoping would not come. Her hands settled in her lap. Her eyes moved from the torn fabric to Daniel's face to the fold of dark green material still in his hand, and something in her expression that had been carefully maintained throughout the evening came quietly apart. She set down her champagne glass slowly, deliberately, as though she needed both hands free for whatever came next. Beside her, her father turned and looked at Daniel with the expression of a man revising a significant projection in real time. The room had stopped. A young woman from the catering staff appeared at Nora's side with a white linen napkin and helped her pin the torn fabric closed with quick, practiced efficiency, saying nothing, operating with the focused calm of someone who has assessed a situation and decided that action is more useful than reaction. Then she crossed to the presentation table near the entrance, collected the wireless microphone that had been left there after the evening's toasts, and placed it in Nora's hand with the matter-of-fact steadiness of someone who has made a choice and is comfortable with it. Nora looked down at the microphone. She looked up at the room. She thought about her son, about the name she would say aloud for the first time in a hospital room in 6 weeks, about the story she was writing for him, right now, whether she chose to or not, because silence is also a story, and she had decided she could not give him that one. She walked to the center of the room. She spoke the way she filed records, clearly, with dates and figures and documentation, without drama and without apology. My name is Nora Callahan. I was married to Daniel Ashworth for 6 years. We finalized our divorce 7 months ago. I am 8 months pregnant with his child. She paused. I am going to describe some financial transactions. Then I am going to leave. She opened the envelope. Bridgewater Consulting Group, LLC, incorporated in Illinois 7 months before the divorce filing. $280,000 transferred from jointly held accounts into an entity that appeared nowhere on the financial disclosure Daniel had submitted to the court. She cited the dates. She cited the amounts. She cited the name of the registered agent. She mentioned the email. Not all of it. Only the sentence that had made her read it 4 times at her kitchen table in the dark. The baby question is a legal matter at this point. I've spoken to someone about preemptive steps. She said it in the same voice she had used for everything else, even, clear, carrying no more weight than the facts themselves already carried, which was enough. Roy Whitfield, at table 4, sat with his hands flat on the white tablecloth and held her gaze with the expression of a man who has finally done the right thing and is registering the difference it makes. Vikram Sehgal turned to the colleague beside him and spoke 3 words. The man immediately took out his phone and stepped away from the table. I have documentation for everything I have described, Nora said. It has been reviewed by a third party with direct knowledge of the relevant transactions. That person is in this room and is prepared to speak to it. She returned the papers to the envelope and folded it closed. That is everything I came here to say. She set the microphone on the table beside her, gently, the way you set down things that have done their work. The room held its silence. Daniel stood near the edge of the dance floor with a fold of dark green fabric in his right hand, and nothing left in his expression. He had reached the end of his available responses. Priya was looking at him the way you look at something you have been carrying for a long time, and have finally set down, not with anger, but with the clear-eyed assessment of a person who has finished deliberating. Her mother spoke to her quietly. Priya shook her head once and did not look away from her husband. Around the room, the quiet machinery of consequence had already begun to turn. 2 men near the bar set down their drinks and moved toward the exit without hurry. A woman at a corner table opened her evening bag for her phone. Vikram Sehgal's colleague was still on his phone at the edge of the room, speaking in the low, rapid tones of someone managing something urgent. The evening that had been designed as a celebration of arrival had become something else, not a scandal. Scandals are loud and need an audience to sustain them. This was quieter than that. This was a reckoning. A room full of people privately revising what they thought they knew and what they intended to do about it. Nora walked to the exit at the pace she had entered, steady, requiring no space that was not freely given. One man, older, in a dark suit she did not recognize, gave her a brief nod as she passed. Not approval exactly, acknowledgement. The recognition between 2 people that some things cost what they cost and are still worth the cost. She went through the main doors and down the stone steps and into the lake forest night, cool and clean, smelling of the lake 2 miles east, the old trees making their patient geometries against the dark. She stopped at the bottom of the steps and put both hands on her stomach. Her son shifted, slow, certain, entirely his own. Roy Whitfield came out a few minutes later. Vikram Sehgal is already on the phone with his attorneys, he said, without preamble. The capital commitment includes a material disclosure clause. If the Bridgewater transfers constitute misrepresentation on the financing documents Daniel provided, Sehgal can claw back the full commitment. He paused. That is $12 million. I thought you should know, because the consequences are going to be larger than what happened in that room tonight, and I did not want you to be surprised by them. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter to me, Nora said. It would be strange if it didn't, Roy said. He looked at her for a moment, at her dress pinned together with a linen napkin, at the envelope in her bag, at the particular expression on her face that he would describe later, when they spoke again under different circumstances, as the face of someone who had already decided and was therefore entirely free. Are you all right? She thought about the question honestly. I'm tired, she said, and I'm going to be all right. He nodded. What you did in there, he said, took more precision than anything I watched Daniel do in 9 years. She looked at him. Thank you, Roy, for doing this, even if not sooner. He gave her a small nod, the nod of a man accepting something he is not sure he has fully earned, and went back inside. She stood alone in the dark under the old elm trees and breathed the lake air and did not look back at the lit windows of the Rosecliff Pavilion, from which she could still faintly hear, or imagine she could hear the sound of the room reconstituting itself into something that was no longer a celebration, the particular acoustic of 300 people processing the gap between the event they had arrived for and the one they were leaving. She thought about Daniel standing at the edge of the dance floor with the torn fabric in his hand, and she thought about something a professor had said in a business ethics class she had taken a decade ago that she had not understood at the time and had carried with her since without knowing why. Power does not reveal character. Exposure does. Daniel had been exposed tonight. Not by her performance, she had not performed anything. Not by her grief, she had refused him that. He had been exposed by his own hand, in front of 300 witnesses, because when he ran out of ways to manage her with words, he had reached out and torn her dress like a man who had genuinely never believed that the normal rules of consequence applied to him. And in doing so, he had given the room the clearest possible picture of who he was, underneath the navy suit, and the practiced laugh, and the vows he had delivered in the elevated cadence of something rehearsed. She had not gone there to show them that picture. She had gone there to tell the truth. The picture was his contribution. She breathed the lake air. Somewhere on the grounds, a bird called once and was quiet. She realized, very tired. The specific tiredness of a person who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has finally set it down, not the tiredness of defeat, but the tiredness of completion. She was ready to go home. She was ready, for the first time in a long time, to simply be in the apartment in Pilsen without anything left to decide. She drove home on 94 with the windows cracked and the radio off. Pilsen at 11 on a weeknight was quiet in the way she loved the taquerias still lit. A few people on the sidewalks, the sound of someone's music from down the block, the city going about its business without reference to hers. She parked on her street and sat in the car for a moment, not thinking, not planning, just present in the specific ordinary fact of being home. Upstairs, the apartment was dark, except for the kitchen light she had left on. She took off her shoes at the door and stood in her bare feet on the cool linoleum and set her bag on the table and took the envelope out and put it in the kitchen drawer with the lease and the insurance papers and the folder labeled medical. And she closed the drawer. She ran the bath, filled the claw foot tub with hot water and a small amount of lavender oil. She lowered herself in with the careful negotiation of a woman 8 months along, and she lay back and looked up at the ceiling. She thought about her son. She thought, you will ask me about this eventually, maybe not for years. And I want to be able to tell you that I did not go there for revenge, and I did not go there for spectacle, and I did not need a room full of strangers to confirm what I already knew about myself. I went there because letting the false version stand was something I could not do to you, because you were never a legal matter, because you were always, from the beginning, the whole point. She lay in the warm water and felt her son move one slow, rolling shift, patient and unhurried and entirely at ease, and she said his name aloud, quietly, in the steam-warmed air. She liked the sound of it. She thought he would too. There is a particular kind of strength that does not announce itself. It does not arrive loudly or need an audience to confirm its existence. It is the kind built in private over months at kitchen tables in the early hours, in break rooms and attorneys' offices, and the long ordinary middle of difficult days out of the materials available, which are often not the materials anyone would have chosen but which turn out to be sufficient. It does not look like what strength is supposed to look like in stories. It looks like a woman in a torn dress, setting a microphone down on a table, and walking toward a door at the same pace she entered. From the inside, it feels like finally telling the truth in the only room where the truth could do the work it needed to do, and then going home. Nora Callahan lay in the warm water in the quiet apartment and let the day finish becoming the past. Her sun shifted once more and was still. Outside the window, the city went on being the city, enormous and continuous and indifferent in the way that makes room for everyone's particular life to matter to itself. Tomorrow, the sun would come through the kitchen window for 40 minutes in the afternoon. There was a dresser to sand and paint. There was a name, already chosen, waiting to be given to someone who did not yet know he was going to need one. There was quite a lot to do. She looked forward to all of it.